Please welcome Andrew Friedman of Semafor.
Good morning. If there's folks in the back, keep coming on in. Wonderful. I'm Andrew Friedman, General Manager and Head of Public Affairs and Corporate Partnerships at Semafor. Thank you all for being here today for an incredibly important and very timely series of conversations about the state of happiness today. We're here to celebrate the release of the 2026 World Happiness Report produced in partnership with Gallup. Each year, the report provides valuable insights into the well-being and the happiness of people across the world. This year, the report asks a particularly urgent question: how is social media shaping our well-being? The focus feels especially relevant at a time when algorithms, feeds, and AI-generated content are the most prevalent source of so many people around the world. Unbiased, trustworthy news, it's never been more important nor harder to parse. When we launched Semafor in 2022, our goal was to deliver journalism that was truly global, transparent, and grounded in facts. Since then, we're proud to say we've grown to over 1 million subscribers and over 5 million readers globally. Through Semafor's coverage today, you'll hear from researchers, policymakers, and technology experts exploring what's at stake for well-being in the digital age and how we can strengthen connection in our communities and across the globe. But of course, none of this would be possible without our fantastic partners. A very special thank you to our founding partner, Gallup, for their extraordinary work producing this report and for hosting us in this historic Great Hall that we're all sitting and standing in today. Gallup is truly a founding partner to Semafor in every sense of the expression, and we're honored to work alongside their team each and every day. Also, a very special thank you to the Coalition to Empower Our Future, our presenting partner for today's live journalism. So with that, let's get started. To kick things off, please welcome Gallup CEO John Clifton to the stage to unveil this year's report and rankings. Welcome, John.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Gallup. Before we reveal the top 10 happiest countries in the world, I want to say just a few things. Number one, I want to say why Gallup does this. And the second piece is, how do we do it? And third, now that we've been doing this for 20 straight years, what is it that were our biggest learnings from the year? So first, why is it that Gallup does this in the first place? I think one of my most favorite interviews that I've ever watched happened in about the 1950s, and Edward R. Murrow, it's so dated, he actually smokes a cigarette throughout the interview. Can you imagine that, if journalists did that today? And he says something to George Gallup. He says, Dr. Gallup, of everything that you've studied, what is it that interests you the most? What a question. To somebody, at least all of us here at Gallup, considers one of the most impactful Americans in history. And he looks back at Edward R. Murrow and he says, well, I'd have to say happiness. So that's why we do this. And at that time, he was doing surveys where he would ask people, just tell me how your life is going. And then he would go in and do his analysis and try to define what the determinants of a great life are. And so we said, well, why would we just do it in the United States? Why don't we just do it for the whole world? So 20 years ago, our chairman made a command decision and said, we're going to start quantifying happiness in almost every single country in the world. So how do we do this? How do we actually capture all of this information, especially in a world of AI? And people, I think, often wonder, what is it that the Gallup organization does when it comes to survey research? Yes, in a world of AI, now we capture things like digital twins. Yes, in a world of AI, we're using AI phone to capture voice. Or even in our analytics, quantitative data looks very different. You can now capture qualitative data, and it'll help you tell what your closed-ended questions once said. But in order to capture every single voice in the world, it looks different. And in 40 countries, we call people in their homes, but in another 100, we show up to their homes. Now, how do you do that? The way that we do it, and it actually looks like this is what you call a sampling frame, but it's effectively a map. And those flags, we send out 5,000 to 6,000 interviewers around the entire planet who show up at homes where those flags are located and have a long dialogue with people to ask that question, how's life going? And it actually looks like this. So this is an interview that took place in Indonesia because there was a photographer there and potentially an American in the room. We throw it out because that may have changed responses, but we also sit there for qualitative purposes. But all of our questionnaires are translated into every major language and dialect in the world in order to capture this information in language. So this is the extent that we go to in order to understand how the world's doing. So now let's find out who is it that's the happiest countries in the world. This is the big reveal, I guess, on the top 10 happiest countries. So let's start with the first 9. This is all the way 10 to number 2 of the happiest countries in the world. Now, I want to point out 2 countries in there. Many are very familiar to the top 10 list, but if you see Costa Rica, and of course the ambassador is with us today, but Costa Rica, where they are ranked, is the highest ranking that any country from Latin America has ever seen in the 20 years of our tracking. And the other one is, you might observe that Israel is among that list. Now, this is amazing for us that are in the data industry, but the remarkable consistency over the past 20 years, Israel has never fallen out of the top 14. And if you're wondering about what happened on October 7th, and again, this is very important as we think about how we capture what it means to have a great life, because this is life evaluation, rate your life on a scale of 0 to 10. But after October 7th, we saw the largest spike that we've ever seen for any country in the history of our entire database, which is over 2,000 countries now that have been measured over these past 20 years. But we saw the largest spike in negative emotions when we capture anger, stress, sadness, pain, and worry. So other variables shifted dramatically. But again, it's remarkable to see Israel on this list. So now that you've seen these 9, what is the happiest country in the world? And for the 9th straight year, the country that's number 1 is Finland. So what did we learn? What have we learned? In this year's report, there are 3 main takeaways. There are actually many of them. This is a very lengthy report, and we owe a debt of gratitude to our colleagues at Oxford that have been doing an incredible amount of analysis. But there are 3 major takeaways. The first one is everything that we hear, read, see in the news, it really feels like the world is in a tough spot. And that is true. But I give you that context because it is remarkable to think about the fact that this year we find that it is actually the happiest we've ever seen the world in our 20 years of tracking. And in fact, in 79 of the countries that we first measured in 2006, 79 out of those 136 original countries have seen increases in how they rate their lives. And in fact, this is a 3-year rolling average that we do. If you break out the single year averages, this is the highest the world has rated their lives in our 20 years of tracking, which is absolutely remarkable. So there is, despite many of the negative things that are very true, there is a lot of good that is happening in the world. Now that said, that takes us to our second finding, because although the world has reached a record when it comes to happiness, it doesn't mean that happiness is at a record for every country. And so there are a few countries where things are not okay. Now, of course, war-torn countries where we are still capturing information, places like Lebanon, places like Yemen, you see that they have among the lowest in the world. In fact, Afghanistan has set a record for the lowest life evaluations anywhere. But I think one of the most remarkable things about this particular report is that now we've seen dramatic declines among countries in the West. In fact, and I'll read these to you, Canada went from 6th overall to 25th. Australia went from 10 to 15th, and the United States dropped from 17 to 23rd. And if you're wondering why, it's young people. Young people right in their lives in the West are dropping dramatically. And that's what's pulling down those averages among those countries. Now, the last question that you'll ask yourself is, of course, why? Now, one thing that you'd think every single Western country would have in common is social media. So this year, there is a deep dive on what is the impact of social media on people's lives. And the answer is far more complex than I think a lot of the analysis has told us. But what we found brings us to our last point. Because again, when you see that these youth declines take place, they do have one thing in common, and it has to do with another thing that was dropping, which is belonging. And people's attitudes toward whether or not they feel like they belong have been declining even before many were picking up social media. And we see that if you want, that it has a 6 times the impact on life evaluation, even more than technology use, is whether or not you feel like you actually belong. So those are our 3 top findings. The world actually, if you look at us, not of the 8 billion, because we interview people who are 15 and older, but the 6 billion as a whole, and on average, are doing better than at any point in the past 20 years. But that's not true everywhere. In war-torn countries, it's down, but it's also down among the youth in the United States and other Western countries. And third, the impact of social media is complex, but if anything, what's pulling them down concerns belonging. So on that note, we have a video that we're going to share that summarizes some of the most important findings from the research that we are doing with social media. Thank you again for being here and having an interest in the work that we do. Thank you.
Social media has exploded over the last 15 years. At the same time, young people in North America and Western Europe have become far less happy. Is social media to blame?
This year's report is on the impact of social media on well-being, and what we're finding is, truth be told, it's a complicated matter.
The case for the prosecution, offered by Jonathan Haidt and Zach Rausch, is 2 parts. The first begins with an amalgamation of the evidence and voices offered by youth themselves, by parents, by teachers, and even some workers at social media companies. The second offers a more academic approach, where the authors of this chapter combine evidence that spans correlational studies, longitudinal studies, and some experimental studies.
We had an open invitation to authors around the world to try and contribute evidence which would either support or contradict the way they were arguing.
Outside the English-speaking world and Western Europe, links between social media use and well-being are more positive.
Latin Americans are even more using of social media and the internet than in the most negatively affected countries, but their youth are pretty happy.
There is strong evidence that people who use social media a lot are much less happy than people who use social media a little.
So that suggests that something needs to be done about it, especially in the case of adolescent girls, where there's a huge difference according to how much social media they use.
But the evidence does suggest a link between the type of use and happiness.
The effect of passive use of social media, receiving algorithmic feeds, one after the other, influences one after the other, has a much worse effect on your well-being than active use of social media for communicating with your friends.
The impact of social media well-being depends on who's using it, how they're using it, what platforms they're using, and also for how long. We should try very hard to put the social back into social media.
Moderate low use of social media platforms is associated with greater life satisfaction, but that significant and higher use is associated with low levels of life satisfaction.
Read the report to find out more.
Please welcome Ambassador Esteban Moctezuma Barragan of Mexico, Ambassador Catalina Crespo Sancho of Costa Rica, Ambassador Ilir Dugoli of Kosovo, Deputy Chief of Mission Stig Pires of Denmark, and Amna Nawaz of PBS NewsHour.
Thank you so much for being here, everyone. Thank you to all of you for being here as well. What a delight we get to start the day talking about happiness, learning from the experts. We have representatives from some of the world's happiest nations here. Mr. Pires, I'm going to begin with you because, as we heard and saw from John, Nordic nations continue to dominate the top of the rankings. Iceland, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and joined Finland to fill out 5 of the top 6. How do you do it?
Well, thank you for inviting me. That's a tough question. I think, so where to start? I think it's also a matter of size. I think we're not that big population-wise. It's a matter of social cohesion, equality. I think it's systematic, and so I know we pay a lot in taxes, but the difference between losing your job and not it's not that big in terms of you have a safety, a security, social security kind of possibility. Mm-hmm. So it's and we look very much alike in terms of high welfare, a lot of trust in institutions. Voter turnout is above, I think it's 84 right now, % of people coming out to vote. Corruption, we are the least corrupt country in the world from some other index. So there's a lot of things I think you can point to as why we are. I mean, all Nordic countries are in top 5 more or less, as I see it. So mm-hmm. It's good news, and we are very happy and very proud about it. It's also something that attracts people to come and work for us and mm-hmm. work in Denmark. There's a lot of good social cohesion and happiness, mm-hmm. more or less. So.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Ambassador Montezuma, I want to ask about Mexico because they ranked 12th. They've moved up in the last several years from 16. How do you look at that ranking? What does it mean to you? And what role has the government played specifically, do you think, in helping people feel happier about their place in the country?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you very much because you called me an expert in happiness. I've never been called like that, and I appreciate it. Well, I think that you can divide this in 2 parts. One is, let's say, the cultural and structural part, which is that Mexico has a very important cultural tradition of family. And so family, it's a way to make people to feel that they belong to a larger group. Families in Mexico are really big because it's not just the core. They adopt, if there is a nephew that lives outside of the city and they come to study in the city, they will live inside the house and be part of the family. So family structure, I think it's a very, very important thing. Mm-hmm. Secondly is that culturally, in Mexico you have a lot of public spaces and public gatherings. Mm. You have fiestas, you have posadas, you have markets. So there is a lot of chance for people to interact and to be part of a big, strong neighborhoods. Then the other thing, the third thing that I see is that Mexicans are very resilient. We come from a conquest. So the Spanish came and there was a group of nations, very big ones. There were about, 11 to 13 million people in Mexico when the Spanish arrived. After that, only 1 million was left. Hmm. And from that million and the Spanish, Mexico was born. So we learned the hard way to create a nation. And third, actually, that's what I think makes like the roots and the base of how people face a life. Mm-hmm. Children are very, very well loved. I think that's very important, that children are the most important part of the families. So they are in a place where they feel loved. And regarding of public policies, in the last 6 years, 13.5 million people came out of poverty, which is very, very important. If you sum up the population of 3 countries, it's more, 13.5 million is more than that population. So a lot of people came out of poverty because of public policies. And in the center of these social policies is the youth. So when you are young, you feel that you have a chance in life, because there are specific policies to help them.
That leads me perfectly to my question for Ambassador Dugoli, which was, we did see the largest gains in happiness primarily in Central and Eastern Europe. Kosovo ranks 16th, and we saw in a lot of places where the happiness scores rose the most, much of that increase was in younger people, which may surprise a lot of folks, but that is true in Kosovo as well. Tell me why. Why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, happy to be here, and I think what I find in that is very reassuring, because you have to keep in mind that 25% over 50% of the population are under 25 years of age, and that means that if that optimism is among that population, that is the overwhelming majority of the population. So that is, of course, a good sign. So for us, that is not only future, it's really the present. I believe that there's a combination of a number of policies over the years that has had an impact, and from social policies that some Ambassador Moctezuma mentioned for his country, and also indicators that really we have seen reported also in other reports, like Gallup's Global Public Safety Report, which, believe it or not, ranks Kosovo as the third in the world and first in Europe when it comes to law and order. So there's been tremendous achievements across the board. And when you talk about the education, which is one of the most important things for young people, we have went from making free education to other levels, including also university level, bachelor and master degrees as well. So this is now in public universities free. So I think elements like that, a combination of elements, is also good governance and generally a number of measures that affect this democratic performance across a number of democratic indicators and economic indicators as well, I mean growth and so on. But what strikes me probably most of all is the fact that for youth, that freedom in life, choice, is very, very important. I mean, the opportunity to shape your life, to take your decisions. And I think that is definitely one of the things that is greatly, greatly appreciated. What I also find very reassuring is the fact that sometimes when there is this happiness, when population is content, some sociologists explain that with post-conflict gratitude. And the fact that you have over 50% of the population who were born after the war express that sentiment, and that sentiment increasing from one year to another, I think shows that we are in the right path.
That's a fascinating point to make too. Ambassador Crespo Sancho, I know you spoke on this panel last year. You talked a lot about how Costa Rica maintains its high happiness ranking. It's the highest ranking ever for a Latin American country this year. But pull us back a little bit and tell us why all this matters for nations. I mean, people see happiness differently, well-being differently, definitionally. Why do you think it matters or should matter to nations how people are viewing this metric right now?
Well, I think there's 2 points here. So one is we all have challenges. All our countries have plenty and very different challenges. And it's despite of those challenges, we still take care of our people, of the well-being of our people. If it's the family, if it's the young people, if it's, the social cohesion. In case of Costa Rica, it's a little bit of we all have a little bit of all of these topics. But it's like, how do you, in spite of the challenges that we have, because we do, Costa Rica and many countries do have challenges, we still take care of the well-being of our people. So, and in the end, that makes them, happy overall, like what's going on and how do you live your everyday life. And the other part is, why is this report so important? It's what is at stake. So last year I was here, Costa Rica was number 6, which was fantastic. This year we're number 4. It's even more, we're very thankful that we're there because it shows the work that's been done year after year, government after government. So this is a historical thing. This is not something that happened, great, 1 year and we're doing this. No, this is work that's been done for decades. So again, what is at stake today? There's pockets of conflict, and conflict creates unhappiness and creates suffering and creates. So how do we put taking care of the well-being of the people at the forefront of what governments should do to the people? And what does people mean? Yes, Costa Ricans are my people, but aren't the people all across the ocean also part of the people? And I think that's what the Costa Rican way is, kindness. Kindness with each other as Costa Ricans, but kindness with our countries and kindness with people we don't know. So I don't know who has been here to Costa Rica. There's a saying that's called pura vida. We use it regardless of your social class, regardless of, I use it for my mom when it's to say hello, to say goodbye, to say I'm good. So how are you? Oh, pura vida, everything good, pura vida. And that is the typical Costa Rican, it means pure life. So the kindness of people just with each other, that is also about well-being. So I think happiness, well-being, kindness should be part of our everyday lingo. In politics, with challenges. So again, what is at stake today?
The social media part of this report I thought was fascinating, and I'd love to get each of your takes on how you view that specific to your nations. And Mr. Piras, I'll begin with you because you saw in the report youth happiness fell in countries like Canada and the US, Australia, English-speaking countries, and in Western Europe, where we saw that drop in well-being in young people coincide with very heavy social media use. Tell us about social media use in Denmark and why you didn't see those drops.
That's a good question. I think, first of all, it's regulated a bit more than we see here, obviously. I think it's also, we have general elections in Denmark right now, and it's actually part of the discussions there whether to move in an even more regulated way for young people to be exposed to SoMe. We've seen Australia going, and it's been brought up, so we have to wait and see for that discussion to end, and if it will produce further regulation.
Is that something Denmark would consider, a similar ban?
I think it's up in the, I don't know, the elections is not yet, so it's up and it's been discussed whether you should do more on it. It's also a matter of in education, you have it in the dining tables with the families. It's something that has been discussed as a problem. So I think there's always a balance whether you could handle it on your own in the families or you should regulate and have the state to do it, and I think that discussion is going on right now. But in our case, I mean, it's something, it goes into education. You have it as a subject, basically, on how to handle SoMe and what to do and what not to do. There are a lot of recommendations from government on how much you should have it. So it's being addressed, but I'm not sure we are there yet. I mean, for my sake, my own kids, they live in the US, obviously, but also when they're back home, they use a lot of SoMe. I think so it's I think it's also the platform on how to digest what you get in terms of having, let's say, a safety, certain, a level of safety in the populations. You have a lot of spare time. I mean, work hours in Denmark right now, there's an average of 37 hours per week, which is low compared to many countries. We have 6 weeks of vacation. So family time and time to address these issues with your children are somewhat better. So we have more time for it, basically. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing I would point to.
Ambassador Zugoli, I'm curious how you look at this because digital entrepreneurship has been such a big part of driving the economy in Kosovo. So how do you look at this issue? How you balance innovation, investing in tech sector, but not just widely encouraging more kids on tech and social media all the time?
Well, thank you for bringing that up because I was really thinking about that now as you were discussing it. And we have really invested a lot in digital connectivity and digital infrastructure in general. And Kosovo has one of the highest internet penetration that you can imagine, virtually 100%. And even the most remote village in the country has high-speed broadband internet and so on. So that sort of investment has been paying dividends in many aspects. Like just over the last 4 years or so, we have had an increase, five-fold increase of ICT sector's exports, now contributing to some 6% in the GDP and so on. So it is a very important aspect of for marketing, for business development, for civic engagement as well in other aspects. So it certainly has its own advantages. But there are also other, let's say, sides. There is a darker side that you cannot neglect, where you see cases of misinformation by some malign actors in our region, or further from the region for sure, or even more, let's say, sinister cases of intimidation and or violation of privacy and so on and so forth. I think it boils down to really education, frankly, because we were thinking like 2 years or so ago to introduce coding, and there was a decision to introduce coding from the first grade and so on as part of that sort of massive investment. But then as soon as you decide about that, you think, okay, but who's going to teach kids if the teachers themselves do not have a sufficient level of literacy? So it needs to be combined, in my opinion, with proper investment in education as a whole, in critical thinking, and also with other aspects beyond the classroom. So in our case, I think that we have a fairly good balance to know that that is an important factor, but that is still kind of virtual component, and you have so much to enjoy outside, outdoors, and with sports, and with so many other activities.
Ambassador Crespo-Sancho, how do you see this?
The social
media use and the balance here. Yeah.
I really liked reading the report because it gave me kind of, at first, you know, my kids are old men already, but they still do a lot of gaming, and so when you read something, you're thinking about what you do. Like I do a lot of TikTok, like what's going on? I get my news and I'm like, oh, maybe not so good. But then I'm thinking, okay, this is the negative side about social media, but what's the positive side? The positive side, at least in this report, is that the study looks that Latin America sees the young people in Latin America perceive social media very different than the rest of the world. I still don't know why, but then the question comes, how do we use social media to the advantage of the well-being of the people, especially of the young people, or the not so young that we like watching TikTok and Instagram and all those other things. So it's about, you know, what they were saying is like if you use it for networking, for learning, so how do we use it more on that for the young people? Because of that creates those connections, which are important. So yes, maybe gaming is, you know, and the study wasn't seen that well, and my two boys are like big time gamers. I don't know if I would tell them not to do that, especially when they're 29 and 20, that just doesn't, I can't do that anymore. But it's like, how do we transform social media for the well-being of the population in general, but specifically of the young people and of the children and the generations that are coming up. And I think that's something that we all have to figure out, regardless of our countries and where, if Latin America, the youth perceive social media to be less complicated, but we need to figure that out. And I think that's what we need to do right now.
Ambassador Moctezuma, I'll give you the last brief word here, because social media penetration is very high in Mexico. Why haven't you seen the same drops other nations have in happiness?
Well, I believe what Catalina just said, that it's perceived in a different way. I think that social media in the young population of Mexico is seen as a modernity. So if you have access, then you have access to a modern world and to learn more. Of course, there is this problem that if you abuse the use of social media, then you start breaking social tissue. And that's very important, because you break the social tissue in the family, in the neighborhood, and because you're always with yourself. So I think that a balance has to be done. And I have a presumption, this is just a presumption, that if you look at Mexico's income pyramid, the happiest people won't be at the top. And you will find more happy people at the base of the pyramid. And if you see geography, I think that the happier people won't be at the north. You will have happier people at the south, because those places are, and those families are, the ones that have much more healthy social tissue.
I think we should have another panel when we invite your sons to talk about gaming and happiness. That'll be for another day. In the meantime, thank you to all of you for being here today. Thank you to you as well.
Please welcome Randy Weingarten of the American Federation of Teachers and Semafor's Ilana Shaw.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Randy.
I'm so happy to be here at a seminar or a conference on happiness and well-being.
Definitely on theme already. And the theme of this particular session is student well-being in the digital age. And that's a great way to frame up, probably the hottest issue on this front, smartphones in the classroom.
Right.
You really opened my eyes backstage by telling me that more states than I thought, 31 now, are banning or restricting smartphones in the classroom. And obviously you're a big proponent of this. Tell me a little bit about what you see about its value for learning and what federal policymakers should be doing.
Well, thank you. And so, I am a social studies teacher, so I always have to bring some props with me. So I have these two props. I will explain them in a minute. But what we saw, look, we're kind of in the middle of all of this because we also just started an AI institute using funds from big tech so that we can teach teachers about AI so that they can be in a driver's seat about when to use it, how to use it, and frankly, only be 5 steps behind their kids instead of 25 steps behind their kids. But what we saw a few years ago, and so many parents and grandparents in this room saw it too, is that something was happening with social media. And we put this report out right after COVID. Look, COVID hugely shifted kids using social media and using tech because that's the way in which they were learning. But we saw, as did Dr. Murthy, that there was a real change and that the addiction to the algorithm was really hurting kids. And not just hurting them in learning, and they were looking down at their phones, not engaging in the belonging that people were talking about before. The screens actually replaced other things, including a sense of belonging, relationships. And so we had actually started pushing for cell phone ban before Uvalde, before Sandy Hook. But after all of those gun violence incidents, people were saying, how can you do this? And it was actually in New York. It was the law enforcement that started talking to parents about the cell phones in school actually made it worse safety-wise. Because if there was, God forbid, a shooter, and a kid's cell phone was still on, you could still, so New York went through a really long process of a year talking to parents, talking to others, and this is what's shocking to me. The implementation was so smooth that nobody's talking about it anymore. We were worried that it was going to be really hard, and what we're seeing is in New York is huge changes in attention. And some of my teacher friends, because I'm in schools a lot, have said to me, it's so quaint. kids are passing notes to each other again. In hallways, kids are talking to each other again instead of looking like this. They're giving a sense. So we'll see what happens in terms of test scores. But the reason I raise this book, which a parent in my building, I live in Inwood, New York still, which is the northernmost kind of neighborhood in Manhattan. And a parent in my building of kids, I've watched these kids grow up. She said, you have to read what Jared wrote. And so I got Jared's book. And what Jared and Jonathan Haidt have said, this is a new book, is that essentially they have looked at all the data. And what we've seen is that our test scores in the United States have gone down from the moment, not for the top quarter, but from the moment that screens were accessible to kids and the swipe was accessible. Because what's happening is it's not just about well-being, it's about attention. And so at the very same moment that the next generation has to be more nuanced, has to know more about critical thinking, all of AI is going to make memorization irrelevant. It is about critical thinking. It is about relationship building. What's happening is attention is being reduced, and we have to rebuild kids' attention and the sense of belonging. So that's why we're on this track of also both. So I feel many times like we have to teach teachers about AI, but we also have to understand the limitations of ed tech and what we need to do in terms of helping ensure that that agency and engagement and that sense of wow and that sense of wonder is back in schools.
Bringing it back to that high number of 31 states, though, is there even the need for federal action at this point? Is Congress just too late to influence it? What do you think needs to happen?
So Congress, look, excuse me for saying it, it's completely pathetic that Congress and the president have not done anything in terms of student well-being. And I give a lot of credit to Chuck Schumer, and he tried. He brought a bunch of tech and us and others in a year ago, but this is, I think, about money in politics, because we almost got COSA and COPPA revived, and Facebook killed it at the end of 2024. And ultimately, kids, I am as a purveyor of politics as much as probably everybody else in this room, but kids do not have a political donor in back of them. And so what we're seeing is parents and teachers are seeing that we have to have some of the safety for kids. So we have pushed back on the federal preemption that would stop states from doing things. And Utah and New York and California have done more than any other state. And immediately after some of these things get passed, big tech brings them into court. So I do think that there really is a role, a huge role, in terms of safety and privacy, in terms of dealing with the disinformation that the federal government has to play, and we need legislation and we need guardrails, and this is one of the things, frankly, the Department of Education should be, instead of all these states trying to figure this out from each other, there should have been some sense of guidance about what to do and how to do it, and that's been completely absent.
Well, one area, though, very comprehensive. One area, though, that you did mention that there is some apparent bipartisan appetite to tackle in Washington is AI chatbots specifically. There's been a lot of stunning reporting about AI chatbots talking to children in a way to kind of lure and hook them. Horrible. I mean, since, though, you at AFT are also doing some good work on AI in the classrooms, draw that line for me between how to responsibly address it in ed tech versus avoid some of those issues.
Look, I am 68 years old. I say that because anyone who is my age did not grow up with computers. And so everything for me is a learned enterprise. I am not a native to this. So it's been interesting to try to figure out, as the national president, what is the proper role of AI, particularly when we have the wild, wild west, and we have no guardrails nationally, and we have, and essentially, when you go to any of these companies or any of these chat boxes, OpenAI, Anthropic, we're working with OpenAI, we're working with Anthropic, we're working with Microsoft, but they'll all say, look, we have this safety design in our product. Well, then what you're doing is you're putting the onus on a parent or a teacher to use it, as opposed to there should be a national guardrail about it. There should be a sense of nationally what is the safety. And the chat box is a perfect example. How on earth do you replace the human being with a chat box when you as a parent do not know what is happening with your kid at 2 o'clock in the morning, and your kid may be this may be because the chat box is supposed to be friendly and supposed to say, oh yeah, I'm on your side. So what happens? Yeah. It's terrible. Yeah. We have to say no. And we've only, thank God, we've only had or know of 1 or 2 suicides because of it. But look what we do on seatbelts. Look, we do in physical danger, but we're not doing this on this. And so I think I'm glad that what we're seeing is Moms for Liberty and the Teachers Union that haven't gotten along on almost anything. We're together on this because we're seeing what is happening to our kids. Yeah. And it really is us against money. And we got to make sure that our kids have a premium and are taken care of. And so we should be thinking about as much protection on virtual safety as we do on physical safety.
Oh, that's a very compelling way to put it. Given, though, that you're also involved in AI in the classroom and you feel like clearly there is and needs to be a clear toolkit for using it responsibly.
Exactly. So you're kind of, that's why I'm saying we're in this kind of both and ways. Situation. Yeah. So I have a bunch of members who are like, why are you working with the tech companies? I'm like, well, how are we going to learn it shouldn't just be me figuring out these guardrails. It should be teachers in classrooms every single day. They should be figuring out how they are in the driver's seat, not me figuring out for them how they are in the driver's seat. And the problem is this, and this will be the prize I see us ending. The problem is this. If you think about what chat boxes can do now, I don't want teachers to be police officers. I don't want them to be deciding, is a kid basically cut and pasting a paper? Remember the blue books? We're going back to blue books. We're going back to handwriting. We're going back to tests.
I remember them.
on paper instead of on computer. But so you don't want the teacher to be basically saying, I am detecting that somebody is using a chat box or Claude or ChatGPT to write this paper. So what do we have to do instead? We really need to think about schooling as knowledge application, as critical thinking, as problem solving, as applying knowledge, because essentially knowledge is going to be knowable by a chat box, if not now, then later. And so teachers need to be able to know and use the tool, not just in a classroom, but understand the tool so they know when to use it in a classroom and when to use it outside of a classroom. Will these tools be helpful? Are there aspects of it that are really helpful? Of course there are. But if we don't actually have guardrails guarding against the terrible aspects of it, like disinformation or misinformation or taking of people's images or that kind of safety issues or the repulsiveness of the chat boxes to young people, if we don't do that, shame on us.
Well, compelling place to end. I wish we had more time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Please welcome Congresswoman Kat Cammack of Florida and Semafor's Nicholas Wu.
thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone.
Right up against the clock.
Exactly. This is Congresswoman Kat Cammack. She's a Republican congresswoman from Florida. And in the House, she chairs the Republican Women's Caucus and the Emerging Tech Task Force. Let's give her a round of applause and welcome her. All right, so Congresswoman, I wanted to start off our discussion by talking a little bit about one of the findings of this new Gallup report, which found that social media was harming adolescents enough to cause population-level changes.
Yes.
You represent a college town, Gainesville.
Go Gators.
What are you hearing from your constituents about what Congress should be doing to rein in social media and its harms?
So this is an interesting topic because it really doesn't cut along traditional partisan lines. It cuts really in different camps where you'll see AOC and myself, two very different sides of the aisle, and working together on some elements in this space because we recognize that as we are more connected than ever, you're seeing increased levels, historic levels, honestly, of reported loneliness, depression, isolation, despite us having the ability to communicate with anyone at any time around the globe. And so talking about that, I mean, we are seeing, and specifically within that chapter that in this report, they were talking about how it's creating this ultimate drive for access, and the whole concept of FOMO really has an impact on people's mental health. And particularly at some impressionable ages, that's where you're seeing that correlation be so detrimental.
That makes a lot of sense. And right now in Congress, there's two different competing proposals for protecting kids online. In the House, in the Senate, there's the Kids Act and COSA. I mean, how do you resolve the differences between those two?
Well, differences in the House and Senate never happens. We get along fabulously. There is a saying in Congress, and both Republicans and Democrats have used it. In the House, we always say, the other party is the opposition, but the Senate is the enemy. Could not be more true, because when it comes to this particular set of bills, we're seeing really more of the duty of care being the defining difference between the two. In the House, we see it as more parental empowerment, giving parents more control and options, where in the Senate, you're seeing language in under the duty of care provision that would really dictate how companies could structure their products. And I don't know about you, but I personally don't think that the government should be in the business of telling companies how they're going to develop their products. And in this case, it would have tremendous impacts on algorithms and source codes. And that's why in the House version, when we're talking about algorithms, we're talking about transparency. Parents and users should have the ability to see what algorithm has been developed that is pushing content to their screens and their news feeds. Whereas in the Senate version, it's telling them how they're going to build that algorithm.
Mm-hmm. Do you see this being the kind of legislation that ends up going to a conference committee?
Well, I mean, if you look at it, the Senate version in my mind is pretty unconstitutional, right? So there's going to have to be a tremendous amount of work done to even get us to a space where we can get in the room and hash out the differences. That's some of the stuff that is concerning to me, is that we're just really far apart right now in terms of the approach to dealing with this issue.
Mm-hmm. Other than those bills, do you see any other prospects for bipartisan legislation in Congress on protecting kids on social media?
Well, selfishly, of course, I'm going to put in a plug for our bill, the App Store Freedom Act, which would allow for sideloading and the creation of third-party marketplaces. So today, on your Apple phone, for example, you have to use the Apple Store, and they have apps that compete with outside companies and entities. I envision a world where parents can actually build a marketplace on their kids' phones, and it's going to be a place where they know that those apps are vetted. Compare that today, where Apple in the App Store has recommendations for nudify and sex chat ads for 4-year-olds. Like, I'm sorry, but no 4-year-old should have access to that. And when they're making recommendations to parents that, hey, this is an app that's safe for a 4-year-old, and it has terrible adult explicit content on there, that's not right. And so I think that bill, and it is bipartisan, Representative Trahan and I have worked really hard on advancing that, and that's a great bipartisan piece of work that could really change the dynamic in empowering parents and really fostering competition, which will help keep kids safe.
Mm-hmm. We're running a little short on time, so just one last quick
question. Those
question.
pesky votes.
Always, always. As a new parent, I mean, how are you and your family thinking about this yourself? Like, are you going to let your daughter use social media when she gets older?
So my sweet baby Augie, Augusta Dare, she is 7 months old. And one of the things that Matt and I have talked about extensively is screen time. We're finding through all the different studies that access to screen time before the age of 3 dramatically causes problems down the road. They're seeing studies of depression, increased rates of medication in adolescents. When we take her to her pediatrician, I actually asked our pediatrician, I said, how are you dealing with parents coming in saying, my kid has ADHD, they're too hyper, they're having these issues, they're acting out, anxiety, whatever. She's saying that they're now prescribing kids as young as 3 prescription drugs. And I say, how is that impacting the parents? And she said, well, what we're seeing is the younger that they are that we're prescribing these drugs, they're becoming lifelong patients. But what we're seeing is that these are kids raising kids, and they're not teaching coping mechanisms outside of screens. And so when parents, and we've all seen it in restaurants, on airplanes, people throw a screen in front of their child and they say, here, pay attention to this. And it's very addicting. And you compare the cartoons of when we were growing up, I was born in '88, to the cartoons today, there's actually studies being run on if you keep changing the screen every 3.7 seconds, that's going to hold that child's attention. Mm-hmm. So the long-winded answer to how we're dealing with this as new parents is no screens before the age of 3 and no social media until 16. And I think that that's important because we are witnessing a generation of people who don't know how to talk to each other. They don't know how to communicate. And when you need doctors and people who need that bedside manner, when you need people who can pick up a phone and have a conversation, we're at that point where we don't have the skill set being instilled in kids at a young age. So that's some of the challenges that we're seeing within this next generation in the age of social media.
I can only imagine. Well, Congresswoman, thank you so much for your time. I think we are, the cane is coming to yank us off the stage.
I know. My team's like, votes have been called.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you so much. Let's give Congresswoman Kamek a round of applause.
Please welcome Carson Domi of the Coalition for Student Wellbeing and Semafor's Andrew Friedman.
Carson, thank you so much for joining us here today, and thanks again to everyone for being here. Let's jump in. Carson, your organization, the Coalition for Student Wellbeing, it's involved in conversations and policy advocacy on youth mental health across the country. What role do you see youth voices playing in addressing this challenge?
Well, thanks for having me, Andrew. The Coalition for Student Wellbeing was founded on the premise that young people are often left out of key conversations when it comes to making policy, but not necessarily by design. College students in particular, it's a tremendously hard group to engage, right? There's lots of turnover when you look at students from two-year institutions, four-year institutions. It's a busy time, a period of transition for a lot of people in their lives. And so it's not necessarily to fault. But at the Coalition for Student Wellbeing, our job is to bridge the gap between students and decision makers through advocacy, collaboration, and education. And ultimately, our goal is to be able to engage and mobilize students from all across the country to be a voice for their peers in their communities and affect change around student well-being.
Amazing. So Carson, tell us a little bit more about how you first got involved in mental health advocacy.
Thank you, yeah. My journey in advocacy actually started when I was 12 years old in my home state of Massachusetts, when I had the opportunity to testify in support of expanding access to telemedicine services. And at that point, a lot of my advocacy was tied to my personal journey with a rare form of Crohn's disease. And from ages about 8 to 16, I was averaging about 50 doctor's appointments per year. And so I was super fortunate to have a family that was able to make that work. But for expanding access to telehealth, a lot of people would have gone without seeking care. And so I wanted to take the opportunity to be a voice for something that would impact so many families, including mine, and really ease access to care. And ever since that first time that I was able to testify when I was 12 years old, I then became fascinated and infatuated with policy and advocacy. But unfortunately, a couple short years later, during my freshman year of high school, is when one of my closest friends died by suicide. And seeing the impact that had on my community, and obviously the impact that had on me personally, really drove me to, after taking the adequate time to grieve, to want to go make a change in this space and expand access to mental health care, education, and resources for all.
Amazing story, and thank you so much for everything that you do, obviously. Taking zooming out a little bit, where do you see opportunities to strengthen the mental health care outlook, especially for young people today?
Well, I think first it starts with having conversations like we're able to have today. I mean, the lineup of people gathered here to talk about mental health and well-being throughout the whole world is honestly such an incredible thing to see, from diplomats to researchers to the former Surgeon General, who I'm a big fan of, Dr. Murthy. But it's just so incredible to see such a comprehensive conversation convened around mental health. But I think beyond just talking about the issue, we need to make sure that we're turning this into action. And that's why I'm so grateful to be representing today the Coalition to Empower Our Future, which really does such an incredible job at convening rooms like this, where we have parents, students, and decision makers all at one table that's able to adequately work on addressing comprehensive solutions to the youth well-being challenge. And beyond that, I think we also need to focus on innovative and scalable solutions. At the Coalition for Student Wellbeing, we've launched an advocacy initiative at the start of this year where we're working to add the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline on student IDs throughout the nation. 988, for those who are not familiar, is a 24/7 free resource provided by the federal government that provides crisis care for people in need. But only 23% of Americans know about this life-saving resource that's right there for them and that they're able to call at any time. And so at the Coalition for Student Wellbeing, obviously, this issue is so large and complex, it's important to narrow down where you're able to make change. And for us, we saw this as a wonderful opportunity to leverage education and leverage a tool as simple as student IDs, a very high traffic utilized resource by students so that they have a reminder in their pocket every single day of where they can go for help if they're in crisis. And so we've been fortunate to deliver a number of wins at schools like the University of Michigan, University of Arkansas, and a whole bunch more just in the short couple of weeks that we've had, a couple of months of this year, and excited to see how we can continue to impact students. And ultimately our hope is to try to save lives through that initiative.
Amazing, and it's so much great impact through that. So there's been a lot of focus today and in the news on the use of phones and devices. I feel like all of us are probably guilty of that at some point or another. Kristen, what's your take on all of this?
Well, I think phones are undoubtedly part of the conversation, right? I mean, I grew up in Gen Z. I'm 21 years old. I'm the generation that grew up with phones in their hands. And so it's undeniably a part of it. But I also think that there's so many opportunities for us to leverage social media and technology if we're able to harness it right. One of the members of the Coalition to Empower Our Future is an organization called Media Literacy Now that does just such a wonderful job at providing real education for families, for educators, to be able to arm the young people in their lives with the right tools, knowledge, and resources to harness the best of the digital world, to have a healthy relationship with social media and hopefully be more connected. But beyond that, I think it's so important to invest in our communities. Something I was so appreciative of the work of Dr. Murthy was on loneliness and isolation. I think there's so much work that we have to do in this country to simultaneously address social media, but also address what's going on with this lack of belonging in our country. And I think there's a number of places that we can start. I think we need to make sure that kids have access to older mentors in their community, I think is a simple way. I think by getting people active, leveraging youth sports is a great outlet. But ultimately, I think we also need to help children find their passion. I've been super lucky growing up, and it's been, obviously through some medical challenges, but to figure out at the age of 12, my passion was advocacy. And I like to think that if other people can find their passions earlier on in lives, they're going to live a fulfilled life, and we're a better society because of that.
I love that. As a father of two, definitely something I think I can take back. So let's zoom out and let's think about, put our optimist hat on for a second. Youth mental health challenge today, it's undoubtedly one of the most pressing issues that the country is facing. But what gives you hope for the future?
I appreciate the question. I'm glad we're able to end on somewhat of a high note with there. I'm a very optimistic person. I'm very hopeful. There's really two sources of inspiration for my hope. Number one is my peers. I'm incredibly fortunate to work with young people from every corner of this country who are leaders in their community. And every single day, I genuinely pinch myself getting to meet the people that I meet that are making change in their communities. And I have no doubt that our generation does have a lot of tall orders to face and challenges to address, but I have no doubt that there's so many bright minds within my generation that will be willing to come forward and try to make a change there. But second is the possibility of progress, I think, is really important. When we look at a challenge as broad and complex as youth well-being, it can oftentimes get overwhelming. And I think a lot of the time why people don't get involved in advocacy, it's hard to find where to start. And something I try to really press upon our advocates is progress, not perfection, is the goal. This is such a complex challenge that's going to take generations to solve. But if we're able to focus on the pursuit of progress, we're going to be able to make real change. As if it's something as small as changing 988, adding 988 on the student IDs, because someone knew that number, that might save their life. And so really taking a big problem and looking at how we can begin to address things in our communities, hope to save lives, and ultimately I look forward to dedicating the rest of my life in pursuit of that progress.
Amazing. Well, we've got time for one last question. Carson, I've gotten to know you a little bit over the last few weeks. You're a pretty busy guy. How are you able to manage serving as both the executive director for Coalition for Student Wellbeing, appear at events like the one we have here at Semafor today, all while juggling being an undergraduate at University of Texas? How do you do it all, and how do you stay organized?
I don't know what I would do without the airlines. Big shout out to them. It's great to be in DC as often as I get to do. But I think for me, ironically, the answer to that question, it really, everything happens for a reason. I'm a firm believer of that. And I think for me, my journey growing up with Crohn's disease and the medical challenges that I had, I think really prepared me for the work that I'm grateful to have the opportunity to do now. And I think one part about that was I was so used to missing school from the time that I was 8 years old. So I know no different. But seriously, I mean, that is very much my answer of I would literally, the second we would start, a semester or a class, I would be working to get as far ahead in that class as I can, knowing that ultimately there was going to be a point in time where I was not doing well and would likely fall back. And not only did that give me the peace of mind while I was sick that I wasn't having to do schoolwork and catching up at the same time, but it also allowed me to get ahead. And fortunately, knock on, I think this is wood, I hope it's wood, that I've been doing much better medically, and I've just kind of kept that motivation and consistency into college and into hopefully post-grad as well, and it's allowed me to juggle this all at once.
Amazing. Well, Carson, thanks so much for sharing your story, and obviously, thank you so much for all the great work the organization is doing.
Thanks, Andrew.
Please welcome Gretchen Rubin, happiness expert, Jennifer Wallace of the Mattering Institute, Manoush Zomarodi of NPR's TED Radio Hour, and Amna Nawaz of PBS NewsHour.
Welcome. Hello, hello. Okay, so we're going to hear from some experts here who's going to help us make sense of the world. Am I overselling?
No, totally. Okay. We've got 20 minutes.
Excellent. Let's start with your reactions to the report findings. Gretchen, I'm going to start with you because just big picture here, right? In general, we found in most Western industrial nations, they're now less happy than they were several years ago. 15 of them had significant drops compared to 4 that had significant increases. When you looked at the report, did anything in there surprise you?
You know, I was surprised by my lack of surprise. I mean, we see this over and over, that these trends have been continuing. I was happy to see that four countries were getting happier. And I think a lot of it comes down to relationships, that really if there is a key to happiness, it's strong relationships. And there are a lot of ways that relationships are fraying. And I think you see that.
Yeah. Jenny, the link that argues the historical trends that we saw, right? When it comes to social media, the rapid adoption of social media by adolescents in the early 2010s, and then you see this population level increase in mental health challenges in the late 2010s. We're talking a lot about social media, but can we lay all of this at the feet of social media?
Right, I think we can. I think we do a disservice to the conversation to make it so narrow on social media. We've seen Robert Putnam and others have been tracking how as a society we are, again, to Gretchen's point, our relationships are fraying, our communities are fraying, our lack of social trust. There are so many more factors going into it besides social media, but I do think social media exacerbates and accelerates what we have been seeing over the last few decades.
What do you think about that, Manish? You agree?
I totally agree. I mean, I think was a point in there that I really was surprised about, which was Norway. So you have Norway, of course, on the list as per usual, but only the older generations, and they actually saw a huge drop in the younger generations in terms of their happiness. Yeah. So what's happening with young Norwegian people? I mean, I think there's a worry that places maybe that have taken for granted cohesion, social cohesion, or a way of life or certain values, they now have to talk about them and make them explicit in a way that that maybe they didn't have to before. So I think about that all the time. Like, we have to tell kids, like, being bored is a human thing. There are good parts of it. Getting off your screen, moving your body. Yes, we didn't used to have to tell kids, you know, to go out and play. They used to do it all the time. Yeah. We have to make time and space for the things that our generation took for granted. And so to see that in Norway in particular, I thought was fascinating.
Gretchen, you're nodding. You
There's so many things that we could just take for granted. Like, just like the social connection you got through the workplace. Like the idea that you could work with people that you never saw face to face, it wasn't a problem that we ever thought about or had to deal with. And now we're thinking, well, how do we bring virtual colleagues together? How do we create social connection and social trust with people who only see each other in 2D? Or children, like part of childhood was just being bored out of your mind and running through your neighborhood out of just sheer lack of anything else to do. And now there's always a screen that can entertain you. So we're having to deliberately, like Norway, reintroduce a lot of values that we're sort of automatically taken care of for us. We're having to rethink that and maybe reinstall them.
I'd love to just add in on values. So when researchers look at values, they separate them into extrinsic values and intrinsic values. Extrinsic values are things like materialistic goals, wanting the high status job, popularity, a certain image. Intrinsic values are things like wanting to be socially connected, a good neighbor, pro-social, good to the environment. Values operate like a zero-sum game. So the more time and energy you spend on the extrinsic materialistic goals, the less room you have in your life for the intrinsic ones, and here's why this matters. Extrinsic values are linked with negative mental health and substance abuse disorder, and intrinsic values are linked with the well-being we want for ourselves and our kids. One thing we are not talking about enough when it comes to social media is how it is activating extrinsic values in young people. So it's not just an experience blocker, which it is, but it's also activating these extrinsic values. And I think that's why we're seeing this in Norway, that you can be surrounded by intrinsic values, but if you're spending hours on a screen being activated, that is what is.
And that was so clear in the report that it broke it out in terms of how social media was being used. If it was WhatsApp, if it was getting people together, kids did better.
Learning, communication, creativity, it was positive. If it was passive, social media, it was negative.
So
all the internet, all screens, all internet is not created equal.
Yeah. This idea, this phrase you use of an experience blocker, I like that. I want to pick up on that because you've mentioned before when we talk about the impacts of social media just on mental health, on emotional well-being, we're missing a big part of the conversation.
Yes.
What are we missing in that?
Well, my whole thing over the last couple of years has been about missing the physical elements of it. I think we talk a lot about the mental health impacts of social media and we don't talk about the physical health impacts because young people, old people, all of us.
Us people.
She's not saying you're old.
No. You're gorgeous. You're happy. But what are we doing when we're on a screen? We are seated most of the time. We are seeing sedentary rates just skyrocketing. And the more we sit, the less we're actually, getting oxygen into our bodies that feeds our brains, that are making us anxious. We need to talk about the full package. I like to think of it as the mind-body tech sort of loop that there is. And I think, yes, we could talk about mental health and support, but we also need to bring back the sort of visceral feeling of being alive and how much happiness just comes with that.
So remember back in the day how much people would complain about how much TV children watched, like sitting in front of the TV, and how small amount of time that was now compared to what you can do in front of a screen. It's quaint.
Okay, so this conversation is titled, What Makes a Life Worthwhile? Let's try to address this if we can, so we can give folks some tips, tools, infrastructure here. Gretchen, if you revisit that infrastructure, how do you look at that? What are the elements that we're talking about here that add to a life feeling worthwhile, purposeful?
I mean, again, I would bring it back to happiness. Ancient philosophers and contemporary scientists say that to be happy, we have to have strong relationships. We need to be able to confide. We need to feel like we belong and matter. We need to feel like we can get support. And just as important for happiness, we need to be able to feel like we give support. And anything that tends to deepen or broaden our relationships tends to make us happier. And anything that diminishes that tends to make us less happy. So I think that that is a lens that we can look at everything through.
And I would look at it through the lens of mattering, which is a deep human need that is going unmet on a global scale. We are in a mattering crisis. Mattering just simply defined as feeling valued by our family, our friends, our colleagues, our society, and having an opportunity to add value back. When that goes unmet, we suffer, and we are seeing that today. So how do you matter? You matter by committing to your relationships. You matter by adding value in small ways in your neighborhoods. We've become so fragile.
Well, and so many people living alone. At
So
least in
many,
the United
and
States.
eating alone,
Yeah,
living
in the United
alone,
States,
not
living
knowing your neighbors, not knowing your colleagues. You know, we are sort of pushing humans at the absolute edge of our capacity, and we are seeing what happens when we do this.
Can you build that sense of mattering in an online community? Can there be an intersection?
Absolutely,
here?
and I think we saw that in the data, that online communities that build this sense of belonging and connection and knowing you are valued and knowing how you add value.
But online communities then always want to get together in person.
That's
right.
always
the next step. They're like, let's all get together.
Yes.
Because you want to take it to that. You want to take it face to face, from URL to IRL. We always want to do it in the end.
And can I just say, what you said to me backstage, I was like, you have a big job. What are you doing here? You're like, I get so much out of coming here and doing this with real humans talking about this topic. I think that is case in point.
Yeah.
Like just
and everybody here.
And thank you for being here, right?
Yeah.
In the context of this, I'm getting back to the other job I go to later tonight. In the context of this moment, when it does feel like there's a lot of uncertainty and fear and people are being pulled apart, all the factors, Gretchen and Jenny and you were talking about, they do feel harder to come by, right? How do you look at that?
Well, I'm frustrated that the conversation has really, sorry, I'm pulling a piece of paper out of my pocket in my hotel last night. Building belonging is more important than restricting phones. Belonging, and this is a quote from the report, belonging has a 6 times the effect on teen well-being than reducing social media does. To me, sure, we can debate bans and all of those things, but I worry that it lets people off the hook. I worry it lets...
It's a simple answer.
Exactly, right. And then if you don't suddenly turn 16 and magically you can handle your phone, right? We have to be building these capacities throughout childhood. I think as a member of Gen X, like, we got to step up. We are like, oh, I remember the before times. Well, guess what? We developed all these abilities that we now can apply, and we see in the report that Gen X and boomers are happier than younger counterparts. So we need to support these younger
the
people.
1900s were very different.
And I think we also have to let young people know they have agency.
Yes.
Yes, this can be a device that puts them at risk, but we know how to handle other risk factors, right? We've been talking about substance abuse and other things that are a risk factor. This is a risk factor, and we know as a society, as clinicians, how to handle this. We have agency, and young people have agency here.
And I think I see that just anecdotally, that there is a lot more conversation about like taking control of your algorithm, resisting the algorithm. Like I know I know a lot of people have sensed a kind of a return to reading, and what people will say is, I want to walk into a bookstore and choose my own book. I don't want something constantly shoved in my face that I have to like deal with. And so I think there is this growing sense of like, how do we change our settings, change the algorithms so that we are asserting ourselves and shaping that environment and not feeling completely passive and captive to it.
So Jenny, this idea of feeling useful, of mattering, of feeling purposeful in your life, I have to ask you, at a time when the tech is advancing so rapidly, all these conversations about AI replacing not just our daily tasks, but potentially our jobs and how we matter
Our spouses.
in our lives. Yes, it's a whole nother panel. How do you look at that? Is that going to complicate the ability of people to feel like they matter?
I think it is. I think we are right to be talking about universal basic income, necessary but not sufficient. We have this deep human need to add value that is not going to go away. We're not going to evolve at the speed of AI. So as a culture, we need to be thinking about how will we protect this human need to feel useful in the world. There's a study that I was reading that haunts me, of suicidal men, and the two words they most often used to describe their suffering was useless and worthless. I am staying awake at night thinking, how are we going to prevent this on a scale like we have never seen before? And that is the work of policy. That's the work of us in this room, figuring out a way to protect this human need that every single human has.
Is it policy that's going to step in here? I mean, how does this turn around?
It's one pathway.
Yeah.
We also need on the ground. We need everyday actions. We need to matter to the people in our lives. We need to see it up close and personal, but we also need to have a mattering lens on policy.
But I think this is one of the challenges for young people is like, where do they invest their time and energy and effort? Like, what is the future that they foresee for themselves? And like, what do they study? What do they envision? And it's all so murky right now that I think that they do feel this great sense of uncertainty. And extrinsic or intrinsic either, it's hard to know where you are going to get that sense of mattering and that sense of purpose, just on a day-to-day level. So I see why they're so distressed about it.
Manoush, does the AI piece of it worry you in the same way? I mean, are we talking about like an amplified, accelerated version of the same issues we're dealing with, or something else entirely?
I mean, that's the big question.
That's the big
right?
question.
Yeah, like, I mean, on the one hand, we'd say, well, if we look at history, and then
Industrial
it's
Revolution.
like, can we look at history? I'm not so sure we can anymore. The optimist in me wants to think, wouldn't it be amazing if we valued and paid nurses and teachers and caregivers and the people who do bring out the best in humans? What if this is their moment, that we're like, you know, the AI can do the rest, but there are these basic human things, teaching kids judgment, showing them how to care for each other, empathy, building stronger families. I want to believe that that can be part of the next chapter. Universal basic income may have to be part of that, but I don't think accelerating people out of jobs, that is going to happen. It is happening. So how do we begin to sort of realize we've been neglecting very key portions of society, and that's really the answer to finding more cohesion again.
So before we can help the rest of the country or the world, let's talk about how each of us can help ourselves. Like, what are some practical, daily, routine habits everyone can take that help to protect that sense of belonging?
Well, anything that we do to deepen or broaden our relationships is something that's going to make us happier. And so, again, like we've been talking about a lot of the downsides of technology, but you can also use the upsides of technology. You can text people frequently. You can FaceTime with somebody who's maybe finds it hard to get out of the house. You can have a walk and talk with a friend who lives far away, and like go for a walk and talk together to get that time outside and also to connect with somebody else. So in the end, it always comes back to these very core human values. We always have to find them within whatever our current challenges are. And sometimes, like with putting down your phone, it's things like turning your phone to grayscale so it's black, white, and gray, using an app, like using the function so that you don't have access to the internet at certain times. Like, there are ways to take control of it, and we just have to, seek to do that.
I think it's thinking hyper-locally. I think it is committing to your friendships, committing to your neighbors, committing to your workplaces, really at the hyper-local level. We're living in a flake culture that I think, COVID spoiled us. If we are going to rebuild
it's the
trust,
corrosion of convenience.
Correct.
Everybody wants everything to be
we
super
want
convenient.
frictionless. We want a frictionless world, but meaning and purpose and mattering in life is found in the friction. Embrace the good friction. Commit to your friendships, commit to your neighborhoods, commit to your colleagues.
Flake culture meaning I make plans and then I break them at the last minute.
Exactly.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Right.
But
that
that
just
erodes
means people
trust.
showing up.
Yep.
Right?
Showing up and committing to it. Just that one simple act of committing to people in your life is how we rebuild trust.
Manoush, what do you think?
Well, I've been all about movement breaks. So I partnered with researchers at Columbia University to see what would happen. We had 20,000 people sign up for a global clinical trial to do something really easy, which was take regular movement breaks throughout their day to break up their screen time. And the results were astounding. Their fatigue levels were down by up to 30%. Their energy levels were up. Their anxiety, their ability to make sense of the work that they did. And interesting, their productivity did not go down. In fact, it went slightly up. So I would say the one thing you can do that it's astounding, will change your life, is to take a 5-minute walk.
5-minute walk.
It's
How
that
frequently?
simple.
Let's be specific here.
I would like you, ideally, to do it 4 to 5 times a day, if you can.
Outside to get
If
sunlight, if
you
you
can,
can.
you get bonus points for outside. But
Got it.
honestly, marching on a Zoom call is going to change your brain and change your circulation in your body. It's really that simple.
Even just standing up and stretching for a moment too?
I want you to move. Their circulation is crucial for oxygenation.
Okay. I feel like we should all just stand up and
We
stretch
could.
now.
We could do that. Yeah, we do it. 1 minute
movement break.
Yeah. You guys have been sitting a long time. Seriously.
Right?
Now we can have a marching panel.
I love that.
It's like a treadmill desk.
The audio
next level.
is going to kill me. Let's one more. We have a couple of seconds left.
Yeah.
A quick takeaway thought. You guys have been so fabulous. I feel like people want something they can walk away with. What do you want people to take away from this conversation? We can sit back down.
Okay. Talk to somebody that you've never talked to before. Like, force yourself to push through the awkwardness. Say, oh, well, we got this assignment to talk to somebody we didn't know, so I'm saying hello to you. You will become energized. You will have that feeling of neighborliness and connection. Even introverts get a little boost from connecting with somebody. You're here in person, take advantage of it. Don't let the opportunity to slip away. Research shows that people overestimate how awkward it will feel or how cringy other people will find it. We really like to connect with other people, so that would be my thing to do here at this conference.
That's a good one.
I would say we are, as I pointed out, we are lacking mattering in our lives. And so what I've started doing, a challenge that I would offer to you, is to imagine everyone you meet wearing an invisible sign around their neck saying, "Tell me, do I matter?" And we can all answer that with eye contact, with warmth, by looking up from our phones and connecting as humans. We need this more than ever as AI is accelerating. We need to keep what it is to be human at the forefront.
My fantasy just came true. You all stood up and walked with me. Are you kidding? I'm so happy. Please do more of that and get people in your life. Like, we all know that person who's like stuck on their screen. Just be like, come on, let's go around the block once. It will change. It will change everything for both of you. Just throwing it out there.
Jenny, Manoush, thank you
And
so
thank
much.
Thank you so much.
Please welcome Alice Marshall of Pinterest, Elizabeth Milovidov of Roblox, and Semafor's Morgan Chalfant.
Thank you so much for being here. So I want to jump in, because we only have a little bit of time, and just start with a question for both of you. Why do you think that such heavy use of social media is, correlating with a decline in happiness in the U.S. specifically, according to this report, and why is it different in other countries?
You want to start?
You go.
Okay. So first, I would say, we just met each other backstage, but it seems like we've known each other forever. She's like, you go, I'll go. So let me first say that Roblox is an immersive gaming platform. We are not social media. But we do see, what's happening. We read the happiness report. And one of the things that I want to stress is the positive part of that report that was talking about social connections and how positive that is. And Roblox is an immersive gaming platform where young users can connect and play, create, code. So it is different. And I feel like if you talk to the right children, you will hear them say, oh my gosh, I'm making friends and a community, and that is contributing to their happiness.
I think part of the issue is that we've been in this giant social experiment with young people and have failed to really stop and question. And I think in periods of rapid innovation and growth, it's important that you have radical clarity about what is the value and purpose that you are providing, right? And I think for the social media sector, for the entire technological ecosystem, there was a failure for over a decade to stop and reckon with what is the purpose and value that we are providing to our users, and what is the end impact, risk, outcomes on young people and their lives. At Pinterest, we have been very intentional about ensuring that safety is the bedrock, the very foundation of our platform. And we've been very clear about the purpose and value that we provide to young people and to their lives. We are providing them, and I think nuance here is really important, right? Not all online experiences are the same from platform to platform. Our platform is about creativity and inspiration and ideas to live your life, not to endlessly scroll and compare your life to someone else's or your body to someone else's. And so I think that the technological ecosystem and platforms failed to stop and say, wait, what are we doing? What's the purpose, and on whose behalf? And understanding what was the impact disaggregated between boys and girls and different age groups.
I absolutely love the value and purpose because I feel that's exactly where we are as well, and especially you said Pinterest having this bedrock of safety, and it's the same thing with Roblox. Everything that we do, we start with safety in mind, and we have to constantly innovate, as I'm sure you do as well. We have to constantly innovate to catch up, but the value and purpose is huge, which is why we speak with our teens, which is why we created a parent council, which I hope I'll get to talk about later. Value and purpose is just so much fun.
Yeah, I do want to ask you about that, but first, Elise, let me just stay with you. I just want to know, from your perspective, who is sort of responsible here? Is it parents? Is it corporations? Is it Congress, the government? Is it a mix?
I think it's all of the above. When you think about who is responsible for the well-being and the outcomes of a young person, it's a whole of society endeavor. It is not just one sector over the other. And I think definitely tech companies have skirted responsibility for too long. And I applaud countries like Australia and others that are saying, no, we're going to set a very clear boundary because, really the value of a society and what they should be measuring, what we should all be measuring society off of is how well are the outcomes for the next generation and all the generations to follow. And so, yes, absolutely, the private sector, the purpose of the private sector should be providing economic mobility and opportunity and supporting the well-being of all of us, especially young people. So it's a whole of society endeavor, and it will take all of those stakeholders coming together, working in a coordinated fashion, opening up the channels of communication and discourse to get to really smart, thoughtful policies and other structures that we need in place to support the outcomes of young people.
Elizabeth, I want to ask you about the parent council and the teen council that you have. Can you give me a sense of a specific example of how that has impacted your platform in a positive way, or sort of how it works?
Sure. So first, let me just explain. The teen council is different than the parent council, obviously. And to give you just a specific example of something that they have done, there are 14 young people from age 14 to 17. And we gave them our community guidelines, our community standards, all of the legalese. And we said, what do you think? And of course, young people, they said, no, this is not going to work. So they helped us rewrite them. And so they're now in really user-friendly, kids-friendly, appropriate language for the younger users. So these 14 to 17-year-olds felt really happy to write something for the younger people. But I think what's really lovely is that the success of the Teen Council is what also led to us being able to create a parent council. So for me, even though I've been a digital parenting expert for over 15 years, this is really the first time there is a position created like this. So I am the head of parental advocacy. I am the voice of parents. I truly am. This is what I do. I am that bridge between parents and caregivers around the world and our internal technical teams. So I have to listen, I get to listen to all of the wonderful stories and the challenges that parents have, and then bring them in-house. So I can also give you an example of something that we've done with the parents. Even though we've just started the Parent Council, and we are 80 members in 4 different regions, so North America, Europe, Latin America, and Asia Pacific. And because just the application procedure for the council was so, we were a victim of our success, that we then opened up Champions, which is an offshoot, so we can just have more parents and hear more parent voices. There we have parents from Africa, from the Middle East. So long story short, all of these parents, we've met with them, we've spoken to them, we've listened to them just once already, and we're going to start doing monthly meetings. And one of the things that the parents mentioned was parental controls. They said they're really difficult. Account linking, it's really difficult. I took that back to the internal teams. We are working on that right now. So I think in the next year, you're going to see even more of those types of changes where parents can tell us what are their challenges, what makes it difficult for them to keep their child safe online, to allow their child to have these positive civil experiences that we know they can have on social media and on online gaming platforms.
Interesting. And obviously, a lot of the conversation in Washington and beyond in the world is really about AI right now. I'm wondering, and I'd love to hear from both of you on this, if you think artificial intelligence is more of an asset or a roadblock in terms of making platforms, more conducive to the well-being of children.
So we've been using AI and machine learning tools since the very beginning of our platform. The existence of Pinterest is really built on machine learning and artificial intelligence. A couple of specific ways that I think we're using it to beneficially deploy our platform. One is we use it in all of our content moderation efforts. So we use a mix of artificial intelligence alongside human moderators to ensure that we're mitigating the spread of any harmful content on Pinterest. So human moderators can do their best, and we set the right policies, leveraging their expertise, but to ensure that we can take those policies to scale, we've been using artificial intelligence to do that. We also have an entire team of engineers and data scientists called our Responsible and Inclusive AI team, who've been leveraging artificial intelligence to ensure that the content that you're served up on Pinterest reflects the full diversity of the world as it is. So we have we've got over 600 million users that are coming to our platform every month. No surprise to this audience, overwhelming majority of them being women and girls. Me being a kid of the 90s, I know how much it impacted me in my mental health every time I would, get the Cosmo magazine or whatever in the mail and see a body that did not look like mine. It just reinforced that I wasn't good enough. And so right now we see 60% of girls saying that they feel daily pressure and anxiety having to compare themselves from what they're seeing online. And so we have our inclusive AI team that's ensuring that if you're looking for your prom dress or you're looking for your first interview outfit, that you are seeing different bodies with different abilities, different skin tones, hair textures, all of that. So that, again, I think the conversation has been going back, and some of this is picked up in the report around the importance of belonging and seeing oneself on Pinterest, on our platforms. That's a huge responsibility. And so that's one way that we've been leveraging artificial intelligence to ensure that that's built into our system and not just a feature on top.
Elizabeth, what about for you?
Yeah, it's really a lot of what Elise is saying is the same that we're doing. I feel like we're living parallel lives. We have, at Roblox, we have really heavily trained human moderators, and of course trying to scale up just because we have 150 million daily users, 150 million. So obviously we need to use AI. So to answer your question, Morgan, AI is an asset for us. We use AI moderation to help us examine the chat, the communications, the content, really to make sure that things are age appropriate. But unfortunately, as we know and we've seen, there's just so much happening. There are a lot of bad actors out there that it is unfortunately a game of whack-a-mole. I'm sure you've heard this expression. And so we have to constantly innovate our systems. One of the things that we did in 2024 is we started working with, we created actually Sentinel, which is an open source AI moderation. And this way we can really go in and look for these types of issues that are happening on the platform and remove them before young people see them, before people take snapshots of them and put them on social media feeds, et cetera. It is really a process, but AI has been a huge and tremendous asset, and I think it will continue to be so. And actually, another thing that Elise was talking about was just the AI's use as far as avatars. And I think that's the same with Roblox as far as that diversion and inclusivity, where you can create anything. Your avatar can, my avatar looks exactly like me, I promise. If you look at it, I'm wearing purple. It really, I'm not joking. And it looks like me. It is a little brown girl. And so I think that's really exciting for all of the different users that are out there, that they can see themselves and be reflected. And I say this also from a position of having been a consultant previously, and again, a digital parenting expert, and I also worked at the Lego Group before. And one of the things that we had done, we had worked with UNICEF on this project called the Responsible Innovation of Technology for Children, RightTech. And the RightTech 8 was a framework project of digital well-being, and it was what can we do to create in our games, on our platforms, that will ensure that children thrive. And so the types of things that Elise has mentioned, what the Pinterest is doing, the types of things that Roblox is doing, this inclusion, this inclusivity, this creativity, this empowerment, those are the things that ensure that children and young people thrive online.
And Elise, we hear bipartisan conversation on Capitol Hill about regulating social media companies, particularly around safety and children. Obviously, Congress has trouble getting anything done these days. DHS is still not funded, but I'm wondering if you think there needs to be federal legislation on this issue, and if so, what should it look like?
Yeah, I think we need the time has come and gone for social media companies, for tech companies to regulate themselves. That time has passed. So we definitely need thoughtful, evidence and data informed regulation to prevent some of the patchwork that we're seeing. And I think that is absolutely, we are open to having dialogue and conversations with folks in government and civil society to ensure that the regulatory frameworks that we put in place are thoughtful, are risk-based, and outcomes-based. And I think that's something that we are absolutely in support of. I mentioned it before that we support, countries that have taken that step already. You're seeing so many folks just grapple with the pace of innovation, and to keep up with that, we need thoughtful regulatory frameworks in place to support young people, and to ensure that we're doing so in a consistent and measured and thoughtful way. We are supporters of App Store age verification. We think that is an opportunity to scale what we know already works to support young people at the point of access. We need more upstream policy approaches to support young people at scale. And we need to be working with regulators on making sure that those frameworks are risk-based and outcomes-based and informed by all the evidence and research that's coming out on the impact of young people.
And Elizabeth, a lot of the conversation about social media in this vein is really about content moderation, parental controls. How much of this do you actually think is about design, though, in terms of the issue and the challenge here?
Well, again, let me be clear that Roblox is not social media, immersive gaming platform. But I do think that the design is important, right? And as we both have been talking about this design of safety as a fundamental core, we're able to build and we're able to innovate. But I would really love to circle back to the question that you asked Elise, because it ties into what you had asked us in the beginning about whose responsibility is this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's all of us. And so the idea that it's all of us, when governments, Roblox supports and shares what governments want to do, each government's going to do it differently for their own people, but they all have the ultimate goal, which is preventing harm for their children. And we are 100% behind that, which is why we do work with Ofcom in the United Kingdom. That's where I live, despite the California accent. And we do work with the E-Safety Commissioner in Australia. And so we are working with them to be a part of the solution, to collaboratively help, because there is no other way. As Elise said, that ship has sailed. I think you said it that way. So now we all need to get together to make something happen, to ensure that for the next generation, that value and purpose exists across social media and online gaming.
Mm-hmm. I will say that some of the blunt force tools and approaches that we've seen to policy, though sometimes I think they make it too easy for companies to say, well, our hands are off the wheel. And we do need companies to do our part, to do their part. So at Pinterest, we were the first major tech platform to set all under 18-year-old profiles to private by default. Mm-hmm. And for under 16-year-olds, you cannot find an under 16-year-old profile at all. You can't be tagged, no one can message you, you can't find their usernames, none of that. So I do believe that companies have a dire responsibility to take the proactive steps to ensure that we're safeguarding young people. Mm-hmm. But I also think to do that at scale, we do need to work in partnership with governments, policy leaders, folks in academia and research to put in those thoughtful measures to do that at a scaled way.
And the local NGOs.
Yeah. And the local NGOs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. I have more questions, but we'll have to chat back in the green room. Thank you both so much.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome Vivek Murthy, former Surgeon General of the United States, and Amna Nawaz of PBS NewsHour.
So nice to see you again.
Good to see you too.
So, a lot of ground covered here today. You're going to pull it all together for us, if you can.
Well,
pressure.
Before I do that,
Yeah.
though, can I just say, not to embarrass you, but this is a time when, not just in the United States, but in the world, where journalism is more important than ever, where good journalists are more important than ever, and Amna is a cream of the crop when it comes to journalists. And having known her for some years, I'll also tell you, as good a journalist as she is, she's even a better person. So I'm just really grateful to be here with you.
Well, this panel is going really well so far. Thank you for saying that.
No, it's true.
I can't tell you how much I enjoy speaking with you. And I also have to say, I always walk away from these conversations feeling a little bit better about the world. So you all are in for a treat. A lot of concerning things were raised in this report, right? You've heard some of the concerns people have about where we are as a nation and our well-being and our happiness. You think so deeply on all of these issues and have worked on them in a really unique way with both the medical background, also knowing what it is to work in government and institute policy here. Just give us your first thoughts. How are you looking at this moment for us as a nation and as a world in terms of how happy we are, how okay we are?
Yeah, look, I'm so happy that we're all here to discuss this topic, because I think for too long what we have done is we've looked at the surface, we've looked at the waves on top of the water and said, that's a problem, but we haven't looked deeper underneath to understand is there something deeper that's driving the economic crises, the political crises, the cultural crises that we're living in? Mm-hmm. And I think there is. I think there's a deeper crisis of spirit. There's a crisis of fulfillment that we're experiencing that's manifesting in lots of different ways. When I think about it, I spent a lot of time with young people when I was Surgeon General, and still do today, in town halls, round tables, all kinds of things. And I often ask them, what is success for you? How are you defining it? And I'm really asking them how society is defining success for them. And with a remarkable level of consistency across geographies, even outside the country as well, people say some version of money, power, and fame. They don't always buy into that necessarily, but they feel like the message that's coming at them, amplified online, particularly on social, is that these are the things that matter. If you really want to make it, truly make it in life, do all three. And then people write books about you, make documentaries about you, like life is going to be great. But all of us know plenty of people who are rich, powerful, and famous, and extraordinarily unhappy. So there's something else that's missing. And one of the things that I've realized, thinking about this deeply, talking to people around the world, studying this, is that there are three things that we need in our life for fulfillment, for deep, lasting fulfillment. We all need to love, we all need to serve, and we all need to grow. We love through our relationships, we serve by being helpful to one another, and we grow by deepening our capacity to understand how to close that gap between the values we have and the values we're living, our capacity to change, our capacity to find meaning in difficult times. So love, serve, grow is these are the core elements, the pillars, if you will, of fulfillment. And that's actually where I think we have to focus and ask ourselves, what is supporting that, like in our lives, the ability to be in a healthy relationship, friendships, etc., but also what is helping us build a culture where we serve and help one another. Service isn't just about, by the way, volunteering for an organization in your community. That's one form of service. But service can also be, do you stop to check on the coworker who was really quiet during a meeting, unusually so, and you suspect maybe something was wrong? Or do you stop to help somebody who looks lost on the street, who would just dump their cart over in the grocery store? Like, these are the small moments where we can serve each other. And what you are telling people when you step up and serve them, when you call them to check on them, is you're not just helping them put the apples back in the cart. You're telling them, I see you, you matter. And in a world where so many people are feeling invisible, where so many people across America told me in clear terms that they felt if they would disappear tomorrow, no one would even care. That acknowledgement that somebody is seen and that they matter, that can mean everything.
I mean, what you're talking about on a basic level here is decency, kindness, real human-to-human connection at a time of great disconnection, which I know you've talked about a lot. Part of me, the skeptical part of my journalist brain, thinks, can it be that easy? Is it really just human-to-human interactions at a time when everything feels so overwhelmingly indecent and unkind sometimes?
So it literally is that simple, but that doesn't mean it's easy.
Yeah.
And sometimes the simplest things in life are the hardest ones to actually put in place. Anyone who's been married knows this, right? Like, you know, of course, like, you should be supportive of your spouse. That's a simple concept, but doing it in practice, not always easy, right? That you should pause to listen before and you respond and defend yourself, but again, in practice, not easy.
I'm not laughing out of recognition. Honey, you're doing great if you're watching.
But I do think that it's like this, you know, we think about food as an essential element that we need to survive. Same with water, right? And we would never say that, you know, life is too busy to like think about people's food and water. We'll deal with that later. Let's deal with it. Because of course, that's part of your sustenance. Well, it turns out that the data that we have now, and frankly, the life experience, tell us that relationships are just as important for survival as food and water. And we know that because over thousands of years, we evolved to need each other, to be in relationship with each other. It's so much so that the culture we have now, which often tells us that, you know, being successful is about being independent. Being independent is about not needing other people. It's about being able to do things on your own. The person who lived according to those values thousands of years ago when we were hunters and gatherers, that person died, right? They got eaten by a predator. They starved because they didn't have enough food. Because what people did is, in fact, they took turns watching around the fire at night to make sure that there were no predators coming. They pooled their food supplies so that everyone would have a little bit, nobody would starve at a given point in time. They helped each other with childcare. We came to realize it's actually our interdependence by helping one another that we actually strengthen ourselves and that we all go farther. And so I do think that the challenge we have is how to come back to some of these core elements that are important. And I think that the happiness report we talked about today is so important. Mm-hmm. I think being able to track happiness is valuable. Being able to understand how technology in particular impacts it for the good and for the bad, especially with AI evolving. This is a new area where we can't just say what applied to social media applies to AI. I think we have to understand and study AI specifically. So that matters. But what I would love to see us do more of as well is to study this question around values. Now, I find that sometimes we are somewhat allergic to talking about values in public conversation. I came upon this a lot when I served in government, in different administrations, but in both cases, there was this like real nervousness whenever people sensed that I was going to go out there and talk about values. Like, whoa, wait. we want to do that? Are we going to alienate people? What's going to happen? And I get it. We don't want to alienate people. We don't want to assume that, my values are your values. We don't want to impose our values on other people. But what we are failing to see is that everyone is living their lives according to certain values. And values are critical drivers of how we operate, the choices we make about career, how we raise our kids, so many things. And so we have to have this conversation. But my belief and what I found is that there is a core set of human values that the vast majority of us believe in. We believe it's important to be kind. We believe that generosity is important. We believe that honesty matters. We believe that love is a powerful and important force in our lives. That doesn't always mean that we live those values every day. There are plenty of examples of people who may not be, some of them in private, some of them in very public settings. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the vast majority of us don't place those values on a pedestal and aspire to them. And if you look at how people raise their kids, ask parents, how many of you want your kids to be kind, generous, thoughtful? How many of you want them to be responsible and to reach out when somebody is in pain and needs help? People will say, yeah, that's the kind of kid that I want. So the question I think we need to have more explicitly is, how can we discuss those values, coalesce around them, and then start talking about how to make sure that those are represented in our life? Because it starts, I know, with what we do in our day-to-day life, right? So can I spend 5 minutes reaching out to a friend I care about? That's how I deepen relationships. Can I do one small thing to help someone today, however small? That's how I engage in service. Can I spend 5 minutes just in reflection, just in quiet, just letting the noise settle? Whether that's just putting my phone outside and sitting on my stoop and feeling the wind blow against my face, that is how I start to give myself an opportunity to start growing. That's how it starts. But the more of us who do that, the more it ladders up. The more people who are engaged in that, then the more people around them are starting to feel like they're connected. They're starting to feel like they're seen and like they matter. The more then that becomes a norm. And when it becomes a norm, then we start to stand up for people in the public square who don't have a voice. We start to stand up and support policies that help kids, even though we may not have kids, because we know people who do. We take our values with us in our heads and our hearts when we go to the ballot box and make sure that we vote for candidates who don't just share our views on tax policy, but who share our deeper views on values and will not only reflect those in policy, but how they conduct themselves, who will be good role models for our kids and will be beacons, for our country around the world. That is what can happen when we lead with our values, but it will not happen if we do not have an explicit conversation about those core human values, values that unite us and values that can power us to what I believe can be the next chapter and a better chapter for humanity.
Didn't I tell y'all? Don't you feel better? Like a little bit better already? I'm curious, I want to hear more about your conversations with young people when you travel around the country and you talk to them about what they're feeling in this moment, because the social media component of this in the report was fascinating, and we have seen these trends of decreased happiness with much higher usage of social media. What did they tell you about that in terms of its potential for good? Do they have answers or solutions for their own generation?
Sure. Well, every conversation I had with young people, they would bring up social media. Most of the time I didn't even ask about it. I mean, it was something eventually I wanted to ask about, but they would just bring it up proactively. And so here's what they said. Yes, they would acknowledge that it can be helpful in staying in touch with old friends. Sometimes it can be helpful in figuring out what's going on campus, right, if they were college students. Sometimes it can be a venue to just express themselves, and to be creative in certain ways. But more often than not, they would point to how it was affecting them negatively, interestingly. I remember one young woman who was one of the leaders at a university in California. She said, no, it was USC, that I'd gone to do a town hall there. And this young woman said, the whole campus thinks about me as somebody who's super popular, super successful, and really kind of doing great. She's like, and I feel that way too, except when I come home after classes and I go to my dorm room and I start checking my social media feed, and then I feel worse about myself. right? Another woman said, you know, I feel so embarrassed that I can't get off of these platforms. And like, she lived 3 hours from campus. This is, you know, the University of Miami. Not 3 hours, sorry, 30 minutes from campus. And she said, you know, so many times, like, I think, okay, I've got a few hours. I just want to go see my family. But let me just check my social media feed for a few minutes, and then I'll go. She's like, and then 2 hours later, I'm still there, and I've lost my chance to go see my family, right? These are not isolated, by the way, what people are saying. Every time people say this, people just keep nodding their heads. And I started asking the students, I was like, how many of you have actually tried to reduce your use of social media, or tried to maybe just quit altogether for a short period of time? Every a hand would go up in the room. How many of you feel like you failed at that? Every hand stayed up. This is very, very hard to do. So look, I think on the one hand, yes, there are some positives of social. There are drawbacks as well. And what we can't do, and this is what we unfortunately do too often, I think, in society, is use that as an explanation, a reason to do nothing. To say, oh, well, I guess there are pros and cons, I guess it's a wash. No, it's not a wash, right? In the same way that you wouldn't say that if your kid came up to you and said, hey, I want to have this thing which you clearly think is junk food. And you say, that has no nutritional value for it. And if you turn around and be like, no, it says here it has calories, and we need calories to stay alive. So isn't that a positive? You would say, okay, yeah, maybe there's a little bit of benefit, but the harms outweigh the benefits, right? I have an 8 and 9-year-old, and they're getting very, very good at coming up with explanations to justify their choices, and I'm like having a hard time keeping up. But all this just to say that I think that for most young people, the harms have outweighed the benefits. Not for everyone, but for most of them. So at a population level, when we think about this, and this is one of the things I published in 2023 when I issued a Surgeon General's report on social media and youth mental health, is that if we want social media to be a positive asset for people, and I would say people across the board, for the majority of young people, then what we need is, number one, data transparency. We need the companies to be sharing information with the public, scientific information about the health impacts of their platforms, especially in young people. The second thing that we need are public audits. We need independent scientists to be able to look at the impact of these platforms using that data to be able to make assessments. The third is, and then those are safety assessments, by the way. And the third is we need guardrails, the kind of guardrails that protect young people from contact by strangers, from harassment, from the kind of addictive features that lead so many young people to say on surveys, and to tell me as well when I traveled, that social media is taking away from their sleep, that it's affecting how they see like their own body image and how they think about themselves. And if we think that these features are just an accident, like oops, just happened to build a whole bunch of addictive features into my platform, they're not. And I think that's what we have to just recognize. I mean, we're dealing with some of the most well-resourced companies in the world, in history, who have hired some of the best product engineers in the world, who are using cutting-edge data from behavioral science and neuroscience to figure out how to keep all of us on for as long as possible, because that is what the business model is based on. More engagement means more ad revenue, means higher stock price, means everyone is happy. Well, everyone except the users. So all of this just to say that, like, it's not that, I think what the report pointed out is really powerful, is that there is a nuance, like in this conversation around social media, but at a population level, too many people are being harmed. And I would just remind you that if we took a medication that showed that it had positive impacts, let's say, for reducing the incidence of heart failure, but led to 10% of people developing life-threatening blood clots, in all likelihood, that would get pulled from the market. And you might say, well, it's only 10%. But 10% over many, many people is a lot of people. Social media is used by more people in the country than any single medication. Yet we have somehow ignored the fact that these harms are there and have failed to put in place the same kind of guardrails we did for cars, right? Where we got seatbelts and airbags and crash testing because we put safety standards in place. And I worry that what we've effectively done, Amna, is we're letting kids drive in cars with no seatbelts or airbags on roads with no speed limits or traffic lights. And we're saying, good luck, summon your willpower, try to do the best you can. This is just the way the world is. This is not the way the world has to be. And this is one of the reasons why we need our Congress and governments across the country to step up and actually do the right thing and put these guardrails in place, because the entire burden is falling on kids and parents right now. The entire burden. And this is the whole reason I did a report, by the way, on social media, was not because I had planned to do so when I came into office. It's because the most common question I was getting from parents is this good for my child? And I realized this is something that I needed to do. So I think the failure to act from legislators has been both a moral failure and a legislative failure. I think that the most sacred responsibility we have in a society is to take care of our children, and we've got a long ways to go to make sure we deliver on that sacred promise.
We're just out of time, but before we go, I want to ask you briefly about this new Substack you're starting very soon called Staying Human. What can folks expect to find there?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so I think we need to have a conversation about how to stay human, which means how to stay kind and empathetic, how to stay grounded in relationships, how to make sure we have that sense of service in our lives and meaning. We need to have that conversation about how to do that in a world which is pulling us in the opposite direction. A lot of the forces we talked about today, and increasingly elements of AI, are replacing jobs, replacing relationships, replacing a lot of what it actually meant to be human. It's not to say that tech is all bad. No, I think there's a lot of good uses of technology. The question we have to navigate is how do we hold on to what it means to be human so that we can find the deeper fulfillment that we all want. That's what this Substack is about. It'll have stories, it'll have interviews that I do, it'll have reflections. And it's part of a broader ecosystem that we're going to be building with a podcast, with other things to be announced, to help drive what I hope will be a cultural shift in our country and in the world to focus more and more on how we can better love, better serve, and better grow so we can ultimately all stay more human.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Dr. Farid.
Thank you for attending today's event, and a special thanks to our partners, Gallup and the Coalition, to empower our future.